If ever there was a man who built some really odd looking aircraft, it's Geoffrey Terence Rowland Hill. Hill was an experienced combat and test pilot who flew in the First World War with the Royal Flying Corps. Between 1925 and 1932, Hill, working alongside the aircraft builder Westlands, developed a series of experimental tailless aircraft, the Pterodactyls. Hill understood that the aircraft of the day had some rather dangerous characteristics, especially in the stall, and he hoped to develop a new aircraft planform that would remove these issues and help protect the lives of pilots. And it is the final one of these experimental aircraft that I want to look at today, the Westland-Hill Pterodactyl 5. This was a direct result of the Westland-Hill partnership trying to make the new concept aircraft commercially viable. The Pterodactyl 4 had been a 3-seat monoplane intended for the civilian market. One had been built for testing and it had proven a good aircraft. But the 4 had flown in 1931, a time when the world economy was not exactly in great shape. Consequently, there was not a lot of market for such an aircraft and it never went into production. But there was one market that, though it did suffer from the Great Economic Crash, was always looking to buy at least some aircraft fairly consistently: the military. So Hill and his team at Westland decided to explore if they could build a cutting-edge fighter incorporating his ideas. The proposed aircraft would have high performance and be a 2-seater, as was fairly common practice of the day, with both machine guns for the pilot firing forward and more mounted on a flexible position for the observer to protect the rear of the aircraft. Being a tailless design, this position would have an excellent field of fire. The proposal was put to the British Air Ministry, who were interested enough to draw up a specification and authorise development for a prototype. Work progressed extremely rapidly, and by the latter half of 1932, the aircraft was complete. Because it was intended to be a fighter, and therefore needed to be capable of hard manoeuvring, the Pterodactyl 5 was built as an unequal span biplane to provide it with even greater strength. While the top wing was swept, the lower, smaller wing retained a straight profile. This also provided an anchoring point for the top wing and was projected to be capable of carrying 20-pound bombs for ground attack in service. The lower wings also had the landing gear balancing struts attached to it, as the main gear was composed of 2 wheels housed inside the fuselage. And speaking of the fuselage, you may have noticed it's rather short, with the vertical stabilisers mounted on the upper wingtips, thus removing the need for the tail. Westland evidently just decided that the fuselage was largely surplus to requirements. In fact, the plane was only 20 feet 6 inches long, which meant that getting the engine, cooling system, fuel tank, control systems, weapons and 2 crew into it was a bit of a squeeze. Armament was 2 fixed forward-firing Vickers machine guns either side of the pilot, which fired through long chutes in the sides of the fuselage. The rear gun position was supposed to be fitted with an electrically powered turret of Hill's own design, which held either 1 or 2 Lewis machine guns, with sources disagreeing on which is correct. But as the turret never seems to have been fitted, and all photographs of the aircraft show the rear position open, it remains an unconfirmed detail. As said, development and construction of the 5 progressed fairly quickly during 1932, and taxi trials were undertaken in the autumn of that year. Unfortunately, the aircraft suffered a setback when the left wing collapsed. The Pterodactyl then had to be returned to Westlands, where work to rectify the fault and strengthen the design further was undertaken. At the same time, work was also done to improve the cooling system of the aircraft's engine, which unfortunately was the Rolls-Royce Goshawk. This experimental engine was all the rage with the British during the early 1930s, which is a shame because it was horribly unreliable and never was able to be made to work properly. Indeed, the limited testing conducted by the 5 before its mishap showed that the Goshawk was problematic and the cooling system needed major reworking. The changes took time, in fact more than building the original aircraft took, and it wasn't until May 1934 that taxi trials were able to be completed, and the aircraft was able to be sent to RAF Andover for flight testing. These showed that the aircraft had no apparent dangerous tendencies, despite its unorthodox design, but the engine was still problematic, and reworking of the condenser and the air intake were again required. Continued flight testing found that the wings tended to flex in dives due to lack of torsional rigidity, which meant the outer portions of the wings also needed to be redesigned and strengthened. And the testing also showed that the Pterodactyl 5 was, despite its compact design and powerful engine, not a particularly good performer. Maximum speed was only 165 miles per hour, which was about 20 miles per hour slower than the RAF's then current two-seater, the Hawker Hart. Despite this, various tweaks continued to be made to the aircraft to address issues in its handling, and by the summer of 1935, it was thought to be ready to be put through its paces at the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough. Unfortunately, as the aircraft took off to head for the RAE, the engine seized and the pilot had to make an emergency landing, though he did bring the aircraft down safely. But the damage to the Goshawk was severe enough that it needed replacing, and there simply wasn't one available. Rolls-Royce only built something like 20 of these engines anyway, and they were all in use with other development programs. So, after some contemplation on what to do with the Pterodactyl 5, in February 1936, the Director of Scientific Research at the Air Ministry ordered that no further flight testing or refinements should be carried out, and that the aircraft should be sent to the RAE for future studies. Westland therefore shipped the aircraft to the establishment, where it appears to have only survived for around a year before being decommissioned and ultimately scrapped. And this also ultimately meant the end of the Pterodactyl series. Hill had left Westland anyway in 1934 and taken a post as Professor of Mechanical Engineering at University College London. Westland had plans for several follow-up Pterodactyl aircraft, with the 6 envisaged to be a pusher version of the 5 with the turret mounted in the nose. But ultimately, the departure of Hill and then the cancellation of the Pterodactyl 5 marked the finish, and this line of rather interesting and odd prototypes and ideas came to an end. I hope you enjoyed this video on the Pterodactyl 5, and if you did, could I ask you to please share it on your social media channels? YouTube is proving problematic at the moment, and it seems that many channels are getting squeezed out for some reason, including, it appears, this one. So if you do like my content, please share those videos with others. Thank you very much, and have a good one.